Hi, everybody. Have you noticed that almost every website we visit tends to look the same? They have the same boring layout, or maybe one of four different layouts. They all have similar color schemes. They have a picture of a product. They have some quotes somewhere here. They have some pictures of their team or people who seem happy to be using their product. They all look the same. If you squint your eyes and look at these sites all side by side, there's a very good chance you'll probably not know which one is which. Well, hold on. I have to show you something. So what I'm showing you here is the personal portfolio of a very talented designer, developer, and content creator known as Dumeme. And what you can see here is it doesn't look like most sites that you've seen. There is a lot of cool visual flair. It is interactive. The color scheme is very bold. Notice the amount of animation you see. It's not static in any stretch of the imagination. All subtle details have a certain level of fun and playfulness to them. You can even see, for example, the colors between transitions from section to section have very varying visual styles. So for example, my mouse cursor suddenly becomes this much larger circle with black and white highlights as we go along, and there's a nice polar effect as I'm hovering over various elements. It's very nicely done. In many ways, this is very different than most of the things we see on the internet today, and it kind of takes us back to a time when websites were creative. There's a bit of personality to them. They had a flair, which often was considered part of what made Flash sites so exciting. And the interesting thing is, this is not done in Flash. This is all HTML, CSS, and JavaScript with the occasional video thrown in there to make everything look more seamless. And the interesting thing part about it also is not just that it's all just web technologies, it's how Dumeme built the content. He built it using not a web framework, not by spending time writing code and debugging and doing the things that many of us think is the proper way to build high performance or high quality websites and applications. He built it using the low code, no code web builder, Webflow. And so I'm very fortunate to be able to chat with Dumeme, and you're going to learn more about how he got started, how he processes all this information and turns his really creative ideas into something that is visually stunning and very, very compelling. And so I'm pretty sure you're going to enjoy my conversation with him, and we're going to cover a bunch more topics around his process for learning new content, how he acquires clients, and many more. And so stick around. All right, Dumeme, it's great to meet you. I had an introduction, I showed a preview of your personal portfolio, which is probably one of the coolest things I've seen on the internet in forever. And so I definitely want to talk more about that. But before then, though, can you please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit more about you?
Thank you. Thank you for having me. So my name is Dumeme. I am a graphic designer, web designer, Webflow developer, and I'm also a visual artist, and I'm based in Lagos, Nigeria. I've been doing this for about 8, 9 years in the creative industry. So I've been doing things like general graphic design, logos, branding, and then I recently picked up web design because I felt like, at that time in my career was time to transition into something more, professional, something to get, my work really out there and, get noticed on a global scale. And, with web design and with Webflow, that allowed me to really, bring my ideas to reality in such a seamless way, without having the limitations of, knowing how to code and, just going from your ideas directly into, reality. That's the beauty about Webflow and web design. So yeah, that's pretty much a summarized version of myself. And yeah, thank you for having me again. It's nice to talk to other professionals in the field.
Oh, no, I'm flattered you consider me a professional, so, but, let's start at the beginning. You started off in design. So what got you interested in design in particular?
I'd say I've kind of been designing for as long as I've known. But if we want to go into specifics, because growing up, I was really artistically inclined, so I would always, be drawing something or painting something or creating something. I've always been a creative at heart, so design kind of came natural to me. But I didn't take it professionally until I think a friend of mine, he's an artist, so he wanted to drop his new single, and then he was like, "Oh, you do this art stuff. Why don't you create like an album cover for me?" And like, let's see how that goes. And then I use, the Paint app that comes with like every default Windows PC. So I use that.
Yes.
I scanned the drawing that I did, and then I put it into Paint, and then kind of manipulated it. And, we ended up with something, decent. And then, from there, I just like started taking on commissions, like, little commissions here and there, like $50 here, stuff like that. This is like just leaving high school. So like, I was like, okay, this is cool. I can make like a little money on the side from doing design. And then over the years, I've just like kind of built on that, learning new, software programs, getting into Photoshop, the Adobe suites, getting into, After Effects. So it's not just design. So I also like dabble into like video stuff as well. So like I video edit, and then, animations as well. I did my very first animation like way back in 2014, I think. I think it's still on my YouTube channel now. So I mean, those combination of things really, piqued my interest in design and like pursuing design as a career, like full time. And it's been a journey ever since then. I've been growing, and this year was like the most pivotal moment in my career. Really getting everything together, like up to this point. All my experiences, all my knowledge of design, like putting everything into, you know, it's it's overwhelming. How I've been able to put all of that together in just the space of a couple of years. And yeah, I'm still growing, still learning, always willing to learn.
Yeah, that's awesome. You almost, you had a passion, you had an interest in design, and you ended up making a career out of it, which is always like probably the best way to pull off a living, in my opinion.
Hmm. Yeah, I completely agree.
So when you created the, nice. When you created your first content, did you have an idea that you're going to be doing this for a long time? Like when you created the album, for your friend, album cover for your friend, were you thinking that this is going to be what I'm going to be spending my rest of my career doing? Or was it just kind of like, let me just do this because my friend asked me to, and then we'll see how it goes from there?
I'd say at the time I didn't really see myself doing it full time. I'd say that because I kind of had other interests. At some point, I was supposed to go to architecture school, so I was more, on the technical side of, drawings and whatnot. So I thought I was always gonna, have a career in that. But, you know, that didn't work out. And, I just ended up studying business. And then I ended up studying business to, kind of monetize the arts and the design stuff I was doing. Cause, when architecture school didn't work out, I decided to like, go back to the drawing board and see what I could, kind of put together and, kind of have a master plan of how I wanted the next couple of years to be. And, from there, I really started to build on that. I really started to kind of, map out, have kind of like a roadmap of how I wanted my career to go. And I'd say, over time, that's what, got me into design. It wasn't necessarily at the first instance. And, I appreciate my friend for pushing me into getting into design, in the most unconventional way. But I mean, ultimately it worked out in the end. So yeah.
Nice. So when it comes to finding clients, I mean, I work with designers frequently, and they often mention the biggest challenge for them is getting recognized, getting clients, and being able to sustain the business over a period of time. What are your tricks? How do clients find you? Do you find them? Do they find you? And how do you keep recurring business if that's a big part of how you do design work?
Okay. I'd actually answer that question in two parts. So the first part would be, um, I kind of say because I think I have like 2 points in my career was my graphic design era, and then now, like the more branding web design era. So like during my graphic design days, I would usually do stuff for like family and friends, people that would, already know me for doing this kind of stuff would just be like, oh, I need a logo for my business, or oh, I need an album art. So I'd usually do stuff like that, and then I'd get referrals, from doing good work. If your work's good enough, it's gonna speak for itself. So I actually, for a long time, I really sucked at, putting my stuff out there. I'd just, depend on, not necessarily depend, but like, as I'm finishing one person's, job, or, someone's logo, like the next thing's coming, someone else is like, oh, okay, I need this. So it was mostly through referrals for the, better part of the first half of my career. And then, you know, nowadays it's, things are like, a lot more different now. Things have kind of evolved over the years. There's a lot more competition. So, if you're offering this, someone's probably offering it at a lower price, or, someone's doing it slightly better than you. Someone's using better tools than you. So what I kind of decided to do, especially this year, cause I noticed like earlier this year, I was trying to apply for like some jobs overseas, trying to look for something more lucrative. And when I got my first couple of rejections, because you're always going to deal with, criticism and rejections throughout your career. So, I kind of took like a step back and, went back to that same drawing board. And I was like, okay, what can I do differently? How can I stand out from the crowd? How can I, really showcase all these things I'm able to do in a cohesive way, and kind of, put everything together in one place? Because, I remember designing my first website like back in 2014 with Squarespace, and with the limitations of like tools like Squarespace and Wix, you can't really get it the way you want it to be. You're just at the mercy of the themes that you have available to you. So I kind of took a step back and looked at the landscape, looked at my competition, kind of looked at what was being done on a global standard, and I had to make sure what I was doing was going to match that standard, because that's the only way to even stand out between your peers. So that was kind of what I did for the better part of this year. So that's when I decided to dive into Webflow, because I remember just watching some stuff on YouTube, because I'm always on YouTube, and seeing some ads about Webflow, and I'm like, okay, this looks cool. Obviously their unique selling proposition was, oh, build these amazing sites with no code. I'm like, yeah, right. Yeah, sure. I can build this. Yeah. Okay. But, the more I looked into it, I realized quickly that, there was a whole community like building around this thing, and like it had been something that was established for so many years. So I decided to, look into it, and then ultimately, it piqued my interest, and, took things up from there.
No, that is really cool. And so you mentioned you learned from YouTube. Are you a self-taught designer, or did you go to like formal education to learn animation design and video editing and so on?
Okay. Yeah, I would say I'm self-taught. I have a cousin who we, kind of started designing together. He kind of put me on into this application called GIMP. I don't know if anyone out there is familiar with GIMP. It's like
Oh
this
yeah,
really,
totally familiar.
yeah, yeah, GIMP is the OG. So he put me onto GIMP and, Photoshop and a couple of the Adobe tools. So we just kind of played around with those things for so many years, and, kind of like built some experience doing those things. Cause the truth about most of these tools is that if you kind of know the basics or the fundamentals, you kind of really know how to use anything. It's all based on layers, all based on, the tools you use to, splice and cut things and move things around. So if you understand the basics of how to use these applications, it's kind of going to be easier for you to be able to adapt to, new and emerging software. So yeah.
Do you learn from articles, or is it videos or other types, or like books?
I wouldn't really say I'm a book person. I hate reading, to be very honest. So I'm more of a visual person. So I'd rather, yeah, I'd rather go through 100 videos on YouTube. Trying to get, but I don't like, one thing I notice about me is I don't necessarily have to go through, oh, from step one to step two. Oh, okay, how to draw a square. So like I would really just dive into the software first and just like play around and like mess around and make mistakes. And I tend to learn faster that way, because you're actually doing rather than just like consuming, you know, hours and hours of content. You actually end up doing stuff and, making the mistakes. And then when you run into those mistakes, you can then go to YouTube and be like, oh, how to, create a div block, how to, do Flexbox and stuff like that. So it really allows you to learn a lot faster. So I'd say if anyone wants to, kind of learn any tools, just dive in. It can get really intimidating at first, opening up the software and you're seeing so many things on screen. But once you get to play around with it, know which tools do what things, it kind of makes it easier in the long run.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Like, tools like Photoshop, even GIMP, they have what's traditionally known as the airplane cockpit effect, where you're like, you're overwhelmed with like all the options there. You're like, and the area you have for design is like this tiny area, like figure out like how do you make it bigger and then start figuring out everything from there. But no, that's great. That's great that experimenting through the product and then going to other visual sources has been a great way for you to learn things as you go along. So now, I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about Webflow and your current website. So you were using Wix, using Squarespace, and then you found that their templating and their theming kind of limited the things that you could do. And so what was the jump from there to going into Webflow? Did you take a step back and go, okay, maybe I need to learn this whole web development, learn web programming and all these things? Or were you like, nope, I'm just going to go figure out the next best low code editor that allows me to create the kind of things I need to create?
Okay. Yeah, I'd say I kind of messed around with a bit of everything. So when I was applying for, positions back then, I, you know, obviously I knew I needed a portfolio. I knew I needed to put something together. So I kind of started out with Wix at first. I kind of skipped Squarespace because I'm like, okay, yeah, been there, done that. It's not really my thing, not really going to help me get where I need to be. So I started with Wix. I actually created an entire website in Wix. And then when I was done, I was like, no, I hate this. I don't want to use this. This doesn't represent what I want to do, what I want to achieve. It doesn't represent my ideas. So that's when, I came across Webflow, and then I quickly realized there was a very daunting learning curve to, Webflow. It wasn't just your usual Figma, just drop and, it was, you needed like to know the technical side of it. You needed to understand some HTML and CSS, how div blocks work, how Flexbox works, um, you know, position sticky and all of that. So again, I went back to YouTube, went back to the Webflow University. Those are really good resources to learning Webflow, especially the Webflow University, because they have the best tutorials I've seen on any platform, anywhere. The tutorials are amazing, amazing team. They're funny, engaging. So if you want to learn Webflow, go to the Webflow University, and get started. They have like the basic guide to get started, quickly. So I kind of use those things, and I basically learned by making mistakes, because I made a lot, and I made so many mistakes. Um, One of my biggest mistakes was creating the entire website, and then I realized I was on the biggest breakpoint, and then I needed to create it on the base breakpoint. So like when I went to the other breakpoints, everything was just all over the place. So I had to start. So like my website has gone through at least 7 to 8 iterations, and they all have different looks, different feels, different. It was crazy. It was a crazy process. That's why when I made the tweet that oh, okay, I'm finally done with my portfolio, I put in the tweet that this took 6 to 7 months of making mistakes, learning new things. And then the crazy part was that I kind of did all of this without really having to spend anything, because with Webflow, you have to do like the hosting and then you're being limited with the free plans to kind of add like custom code and like stuff like that. But like I was using that time to like kind of find out loopholes on how I can kind of finesse doing this. And then so it was really trying to play around with those kind of things, and then ultimately getting the end result, which is the most important thing. Nobody needs to know how long you spent on it or how many blood, sweat, and tears you put into it, but like the end result was what I was mostly focused on, and yeah, I'm glad I was able to achieve that in the end.
So did it take you 6 7 months from going, I'm going to try out Webflow, going through all those 8 iterations, and then having the website that you have currently?
No, I'd say the current website kind of took, let's say, 4 months. I'd say the other 4 months were me making mistakes, me learning Webflow, me building in Wix, and then throwing that away. So yeah, I think I also tried Framer as well. Framer is another really good no code tool. I think it's like the first one you should learn before diving into Webflow, because Framer allows you to just import your Figma designs and then publish them right away. So it's a really, it's not as advanced as Webflow. It doesn't have the same integrations and um you know lovely animations and all of that. So, but it's a really nice no code tool to kind of get started in the no code business.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of the demos that both Framer and Webflow create, and I'm always impressed by it. And the reason what impresses me is that a lot of web developers, who I tend to work very closely with, we spend a lot of time learning HTML, CSS, JavaScript, whatever framework is the flavor of the month right now, and all these things. And the end result, that we all enter it going like, we want to create sites that look visually stunning, that have animation, that do all these cool things. By the time we get to the whole end of learning all those technical things, we're like, okay, I'm just building a landing page that looks just like every other landing page, because you're completely burnt out from all the technical details. And then
Mm-hmm.
you realize that, okay, everything I've learned isn't really going to translate. And I think a big reason for that, and I think why I'm a big fan of low code, no code tools, is that there's always a saying that you want to solve problems in the domain you're in. And so solving visual tasks and animation tasks, you want to be able to solve it using direct manipulation and things where you're actually moving things around in the way the final output might be. Whereas in most professional development setups, you're writing in text, you're writing in arcane JavaScript or WebGL, or some very abstract language that is completely decoupled from what the final output of it looks like. So you're drawing a rectangle, but you're writing like 8 lines of code in like using numbers. But what you really want to do is to be able to draw a rectangle like you always would have done in the past. And that's what I actually really enjoy about low code tools, because what you have created would be, I'm going to say, either impossible to do by any one person in a reasonable period of time using a traditional web framework, or it would be some one of those things where they're going to be like, okay, I'm going to start with this, but I want to put a video for everything else there, because there's no way I'm going to have interactive elements that are going to do what I wanted to do. So that's what impressed me the most about this. And hearing you talk about their low code, no code journey, I guess further reinforces my general bias towards cool, creative things need to be done in visual tools, because that's where the real, mapping between I have an idea to I now want to create something really lives.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so let's talk about the website itself. There's so many things that are going on there which I find fascinating. Like there's marquee effects, there's a cursor that's changing. How many of that required you to learn some of the more technical details to pull off, and how much of it is more of just Webflow giving you capabilities to be able to easily translate your vision into something that works in the browser?
I'd say it was a lot of learning from things that already exist, and kind of making it your own. What I mean by that is, Webflow has this community of um designers and developers that create these clonables. So I work with a lot of clonables, looking for clonables that kind of represent, let's say, maybe an effect that I'm trying to achieve, and then kind of clone it, break it down, and see how it was created, and then see how I can implement something like that into my website. So, for instance, you spoke about things like interactive elements, marquee effects, all those things. You can have the basic knowledge of knowing how to do one thing, but then how do you make those two things kind of work together? So that's where you have to apply, I'd say common knowledge, because I don't really know how else to, kind of put it. It's just knowing with your experience as a designer, and, just knowing how most design tools work. So for instance, you're doing a lot of things in Webflow that you'd normally do in things like After Effects. So you're doing that natively in Webflow, and then it allows you to kind of, you know, have that full control of, your animations or your transitions, or your scroll animation. So you're doing all of that natively in Webflow. You don't have to go to any other, so learning that in itself is its own task, knowing how to animate, knowing how to, kind of hide elements you don't want to be seen, and kind of making everything work together. And then at the same time, you have to make everything responsive. You have to make everything snappy. You have to make everything, kind of, accessible, so to speak. Cause it's one thing for you to have all these fancy designs, and then it's another thing for it to be breaking on someone's, low powered PC. And then, it looks great on your Mac and everything. And then, you just have to optimize for as many devices as possible. You have to optimize for many, breakpoints. So it takes some level of finesse to be able to do that in such a way that everything still works, because there were so many times like things were just breaking, things were not loading in properly. So you have to just take the time back and kind of figure out, oh, okay, how can I fix this? There were so many times all the animations on the page would just unlink themselves, and then I would have to do everything all over again. So there are things that can really, frustrate. That's why it can take that long. Do you understand what I'm saying? So it's not necessarily, building it and, learning. It's also the mistakes. It's also the, optimization. It's also things breaking. Things are going to break a lot all the time. Things are going to break. And then it's up to you to like just use your knowledge and, resources on the internet to just, kind of try and fix them, yeah.
Yeah, no, I don't envy having to create all that content, especially these days. I got my feet wet with animation with a tool called Flash from Macromedia that got bought by
Mm,
Adobe. Did you ever use
mm.
Flash, or was it way before your time?
Yeah, I heard about Flash. I heard about Dreamweaver. I heard about these tools like way back in the day. I never knew what they were used for. I just heard about them, because I think they were a product of their
Gotcha.
time.
So I'd say, in many ways, Flash is like more of a. Yeah, exactly. It was definitely a product that was unique for its time. And the thing is that, you could create anime. It's very much like After Effects, except the output would be content that ran in your browser in a vector format. It's probably the simplest way I can describe it. But
Hmm.
back then, though, you didn't have to worry about multiple screen sizes or like mobile devices and so on. You pretty much created a fixed size viewport content and just
Hmm.
went there. And for people who wanted something that's more accessible and was like more friendly for other things, you create an HTML version of the site, which is mostly just a much more bare bones version. So oftentimes you'd see like when you go to one of those pages, and archive.org is great to kind of go back in time like 20 years and look at how some of the big brands position their content. You'd have a choice. You can view the high quality interactive Flash version of the website, or you can click on the basic HTML version. And that's
Hmm.
how people did it back then. And so nowadays, hearing what you do and seeing what others do as well, it's much more complicated because you're trying to provide an experience that is tailored to the capabilities of the device that the user is on. So, if they're on a high
Hmm.
powered machine, high bandwidth, large screens, there's a particular look that is optimized for that. If you're on a mobile device with you have lower bandwidth and you have to take into account a variety of other things like lower processor speed and so on, you have a different version. It's all done dynamically. There's no choices a developer makes. So I can absolutely sympathize with the amount of work you're doing, but on the other hand, also not sympathize deeply because we copped out. We took an easy way out where we just said, nope, you're just gonna get a basic text version of all this content. That's good enough because you don't have these kind of things. So that's all the more impressive. When you said you created, you started creating animations, and like I think like 8 9 years ago, what tool were you using for the animation? Was it After Effects?
Hmm. Okay, so I kind of used the tools we had available at the time. So I think my first proper kind of software was, I think, a lot of people are not going to know this. I think it was called Sony Vegas Pro. I think it was an editing suite made by Sony like way back then. So I think I used that to piece together my first animation, which was a rotoscoped kind of stop motion animation. So I kind of drew the individual frames in Photoshop for a music video for a friend back in the day, and then I kind of put all those frames together on Sony Vegas Pro. That was my first animation. That was my first proper like stint at, something of that scale. Kind of it was really ambitious, and then those were, the tools I had available at the time. So I don't think things like After Effects or, were really a thing back then, you know. So, or even if they were just way above my, you know, they're just way above my pay grade at the time. So it's crazy to see how things have evolved over the years. The kind of tools we have, today. It's really nice to see.
No, that is awesome because I actually use Sony Vegas Pro. I always liked it as well, even though I had it in Flash and After Effects because it
Yeah.
was approachable. I felt
Mhm.
like if I want to do something that went from point A to point B and had an idea in mind that I want to do from having an image, I found it to be one of the best tools out there for being able to do this. And so you're probably the first person that I've ever spoken to that also has said they've used Sony Vegas Pro because whenever I mentioned, they're like, "What is that? Sony made
Yeah.
design tools?"
Yeah.
I'm like, yeah, back then they made really good design tools.
Mhm.
I think it changed hands a few times, and I
Mhm.
think the tool
Yeah.
is still good, but I think it has kind of lost its luster compared
Mhm.
to Webflow and some of the more modern tools out there. No, that is really really cool to see that. And so you mentioned you do video editing and all these things. Have you been following the trends in this whole AI, artificial intelligence, machine learning community where you can just type in text prompts, and you get output, which could be full motion video or even like high quality images. Have you played with any of those?
um, I haven't really had the opportunity to play around with those AI generators and AI tools. I probably want to get my hands dirty with that, but I haven't really had the time to kind of dive into that rabbit hole because there's a lot to kind of process with it. But I've seen stuff that's made with AI, and I think it's a step in the right direction. It hasn't, it's not coming to take our jobs yet, but it's kind of like a proof of concept, to kind of see what's possible, to kind of see how how far we can take the AI technology and kind of like build on it and kind of get more. I kind of see as kind of like a helper to what we're trying to do, kind of as a support. I don't see it replacing us. I see it more of as a support. So yeah, I'd really like to dive into that. I think Mid Journey and a couple other AIs, Dali too. Yeah, I want to get into all of that.
Tools. And one could imagine the next step of it could be you have AI ML assistants that help you take your low code knowledge and go one step further, which just means that more people are now able to create things. And then the quality of the course will vary greatly based on your own talents.
Yeah, yeah. I think if these no code tools can get to that point, I think it will be amazing. I think people will do amazing things. It will make the workflow a lot faster. It will make things, get pushed out a lot faster. And ultimately it's just gonna make everyone a lot more productive.
Absolutely. Are you also like following some of the work in a 3D game engine space, like of Unity and Unreal and on all those areas?
Not as much as I want to. Not as much as I want to. I think I've watched a couple of Unreal Engine 5 demos, and it's amazing stuff. The nanite technology. You know, I haven't really seen what people have been able to do with that. I haven't really been following that, but I'd really like to see how far that, especially with AAA gaming, and how you know the developers can really start to push that in these powerful systems we have now, the Xbox and the PS5 and whatnot. um but like in terms of like 3D stuff, I'd say I still know the basics. I haven't really been able to, I haven't really had the time to kind of dive into 3D, but I made sure I wanted to have some 3D elements implemented in my website as well to kind of show my interest in that, and, to kind of implement that as well. Webflow, again, was able to make it possible without really having any knowledge of, how to, move from 3D to web with no code, because it literally was no code involved in making that transition.
So, okay, speaking of 3D, on your website, you have this 3D, almost like a sphere made up of like many geometric points. How did you build that? Was it a 3D model you exported and you were able to rotate, using Webflow, or was it something you had to do in a more technical fashion?
Yeah, so I think I made that in Blender and kind of animated it out as a Lottie file in After Effects. Yeah, so it wasn't really any technical. I didn't want to get too technical with the 3D shapes and whatnot, because you need some code to kind of like plug that into the site, and I didn't really have the time to like dive into all of that. So I just, you know, so like most of these things are just workarounds to like kind of, get kind of the same effect, but with less time, spent doing that. So yeah, they're just Lottie files.
No, that is really cool because these are the kind of effects that are in many ways you're like, oh, it's very subtle, but they're also the things that really set your visual brand apart from everyone else's. Because after a period of time, my biggest frustration with the web today is that everything looks the same. Everyone does the same thing, following the same
Mm.
basic template, even if they didn't use a template, because like I will not use a template, but the end result is you might as well save time and use a template because it looks exactly the same as everything else
Hmm.
out there.
Yeah.
And the thing we often I feel like we lost is the how do you create an emotional connection between the person who's viewing your content and the brand and what you're ultimately in the case, promoting or showing off or highlighting. And this is what I really love about your website is that it really has personality, the colors, the bold choice of contrast. For example, when you hover over it, the cursor actually changes from like, inverts the color spacing depending on the background. So it's yellow and black in some cases, then it goes to black and yellow in other cases, which is like really nice touches, which normally you don't see unless someone really thought about doing some of this. So, what is your process like for designing? Do you start with paper and pencil? Do you just do all your sketching and ideating in Photoshop? Or do you just use Webflow directly and just say, I'm going to do it live?
Mm. Yeah, I did that at first and didn't really work out. So I that was kind of like yeah, it was kind of part of my mistakes phase. So one thing I would say is to always follow a process, which is why it took me such a long time to kind of get this done, because at first I was just focused on the result and then not really on the process. So I was just moving from point A to C and then from C to Z, you know. So I kind of like took a step back when I saw that I was wasting too much time on that. I kind of took a step back and then started from the design. I decided to kind of break it down exactly how I wanted it to be. So I did that in Figma, kind of wireframed it out, kind of sectioned out everything that I wanted to have on the landing page, and then there was a lot of research that I had to do, looking at other portfolios that kind of inspired me, looking at things made in Webflow, seeing what was possible with Webflow, and then kind of putting everything together. And then if something doesn't work, like for instance, the way I want to display my product design case studies, that changed like so many times, because I'm like, okay, I can have it in such a way that people can, like, it's really accessible. I can have it in such a way that it displays the mini information, and then people would be inclined to kind of like click on it and find out more. And then just finding different ways to kind of better the user experience, which is ultimately what you need to keep in mind when you're creating something like this. So kind of going back to the drawing board and doing all of that saved me so much time, because when you're done designing, so designing took me like a full month. When I had made all those mistakes in Webflow, I went back, designed everything, and then when I was happy with the final design, you just start building in Webflow. So the transition is more seamless. You can just pixel peep and then create it exactly how you want it to be. You don't have to really think about, oh, okay, I want to kind of change this, because you can always go back to Figma and then do that. So I was kind of doing that at first in Webflow, and then it's obviously it's not drag and drop, so it's not as easy to just move things around. So I'd say having that process is really important. It's going to save you so much time. Don't feel like you need to skip out on anything because you're going to go back and do that thing. That's the truth.
With Figma, you have a lot of visual transitions and animations and so on. How were you able to kind of think about, or at least like sketch out what those might look like? Because my assumption is that Figma would have given you a good static wireframe of what you want to
Mm.
do. How did you do any kind of bridging between the static and then the movement before you went into Webflow, or was it just directly use Webflow for experimenting with that?
Okay, so I'd say I kind of had the ideas in my head, and I just put them in a static mode on Figma. So I'd have the idea in my head, and then I just want to display it in such a way that I can just always reference, oh, okay, this is how it's going to look. But then I know that this element is going to move. I know that this is going to, so just kind of like map that out in my head, and not necessarily because I'm the client. I know how I want it to be, so I don't really need to like spend all the time kind of like prototyping in Figma when I could just start building, and then, because I already know what I want it to look like, how I want the animation to move. So for instance, the part where you go to and then you see the featured projects, and you have things like rotating and, with the scroll animations, I kind of already had that in mind. I was like, okay, I know I want this to rotate. I know I want this to rotate in the opposite position. And then, so in Figma, it's just static images, but then in my head, I know that, okay, this is exactly how I want it to be. So I kind of work like that, but if I'm working for a client, for instance, I definitely have to find a way to, visually present that to them. So they're not in my head. I can only do so much, trying to explain, but then putting that in a visual sense would really give them the perspective and, kind of a rough idea of how it's going to be.
You mentioned that you were your client. At any point, did you ask for feedback or run it by a few people before you did it, or was it more of a case where you designed it, you were like, "I like this. This is exactly what I want to do," and you just went ahead with it?
Yeah, I think the latter, because it's really personal. I felt like getting feedback on something so personal wasn't really going to do anything, because at the end of the day, I'm going to do what I felt like really represented me, and kind of put what my beliefs and my ideas like out in the open. So nobody's going to do that better than, you know, the person designing it. So yeah, that's why I said I was my client, because, um, everything that goes into a personal portfolio like that is really coming from you. So, but I'm not against getting feedback. Don't get me wrong. I just felt like, okay, you know, I'm just gonna kind of waste, more time trying to get feedback on things I'm probably not gonna change. But it's always important to try and get feedback, especially from a technical standpoint. So that's why I did a lot of testing. So I made sure I tested on different devices to kind of make sure everything was optimized. So it wasn't going to be a problem of, oh, it's not responsive, it's breaking, I'd rather have that problem than, the design itself being the problem, because I feel like design is really subjective. A lot of some people might see, and then they're not gonna, it's not their thing. It can't be for everybody. They might say, oh, there are too many animations. Oh, why do you use so many vibrant colors? So it's really subjective. And I felt like, whoever's going to appreciate it would appreciate it. And, I just kind of went with that.
Nice. Essentially, it's an autobiography in visual form that is all you, and so for that, asking for people for feedback on it doesn't really apply,
Mm,
which is great to hear. So, what
mm.
has the feedback been like? What have people been saying? I've made it very openly clear. I love the site. I think it's fantastic. What are the other kind of things you've been hearing from people?
It's been amazing. It's been amazing. I didn't think, because, like prior to that, I've been spending like so much time, working on that. So I haven't really been on social media like that. So haven't tweeted in a while. If I tweet, don't get that many engagements, because I'm not tweeting about anything, really design related. So the feedback has been amazing. The tweet did, astronomically better than I thought it was going to. So, and that really opened a lot of doors for me. And, I'm so grateful, that people appreciate how much work blood, sweat, and tears went into that, and so it's really that sense of fulfillment at the end of the day. Knowing you've put in the work, and then you know once you've put in that much work, and then once you're confident in that work, everything. I feel like everything that follows, you probably deserve that.
No, I think that's great to hear, and congratulations on all of the success you received. I don't think there's a better way to end our conversation than on that note. So, Dumeme, thank you so much for taking the time and walking through your process for how you got started with design, how you built your personal portfolio, and then all the interesting things in between on how you prototype, how you find clients, and all the other interesting things that we kind of chatted about. So, thanks again.
Yeah, thank you for having me. And for getting clients, I just want to quickly add, I think I forgot to add that in my initial point. So for getting clients and kind of putting your work out there, I'd say Twitter and LinkedIn are really important on a professional level. Twitter is such an amazing tool for, getting things out there in front of people. You never know who's on Twitter. You never know who's looking at stuff like that. And then on LinkedIn as well, just put your stuff out there. I've been struggling with that for so long, and then when I took the plunge, it's finally paying off. So yeah, I'd say that as well. But yeah, thank you for having me. This has been an amazing chat. It's usually definitely out of my comfort zone, but I'm glad I did it anyways. And yeah, I hope we can build some sort of meaningful relationship out of this, and yeah, help the community.
Sounds like a plan to me. I definitely want to have you on the next time around. You create something just like this and to chat more about how you've grown as a designer and as a technical person and anything interesting you've learned since you've started down this path of using Webflow for creating really cool things. It's a long-term journey. Like I said, I've been doing this since 1998, since I was in like middle school, and I'm still doing it because I really enjoy it. And some of the people I
It's
talk to I've known
amazing.
for like 20 years, which is like a lifetime on the internet. So I'm looking forward to chatting about this 20 years from now as well. And hopefully that won't be the second time, but of course, we chat. All right. I will talk to you in a bit. Thank you again.
All right, cheers. Take care.